All right, let's talk about this. So clearly, a lot to talk about. Joining me once again, litigator and former prosecutor Angela Turiano, and also joining us in the discussion, criminal defense attorney Jeffrey Wolf. It's great to have you both here. Jeffrey, start with you. Welcome to the Durst discussion, the saga that never ends. We talk about him on the stand here, and this was an important part of the overall theme of what Lewin is trying to point out to the jury, right, about how Durst viewed his wife, Kathy, how he behaved towards her, how he treated her. What did you take away from that exchange?
Well, what I always seem to take away from Lewin's questioning is I can't figure out why nobody is objecting to speculation. That's first and foremost. The rules of evidence are a little bit more important to me than they seem to be to this trial. And when somebody asks you to assume and what would happen if, those are clear indications that the question they're asking for calls for speculation, and I can't figure out why they're not objecting to it. It doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. But the interaction between Lewin and Durst is so combative. They so dislike each other. There is so much personal animosity between the two of them that they can't seem to have a simple conversation on the stand without arguing about everything. Durst says, I don't recall that happened, and Lewin can't just let it go. He can't just let it go, save it for closing, and say he didn't deny it. He said he couldn't recall it. He has to then go back and ask the so question, which we're all taught in law school to not do. What does I don't recall mean to you, Bob? Which then gives Bob an opportunity to argue back. I don't know. It just gives me a really bad feeling the way that Lewin takes everything so personally.
Let me just press you on that, Jeffrey, because isn't he trying to say that he's a liar? I mean, he's already caught him in a number of inconsistencies. That's what I think he's pressing him about.
Yeah, press him about it. That's fine. But check the boxes, argue it in closing. You're not going to get Bob Durst to raise his hands and say, you got me, liar, guilty, where's the jail cell? He's not going to do that. And you can't control this witness. And he seems to think he can control every single witness. We've seen him do it over and over and over again. And eventually the jury doesn't like that. And a trial is as much about whether the jury is buying what you're selling because they like you and they believe you as anything else. And the more that you get made to look like you are bullying people on the stand, even Robert Durst, it can come back to bite you. And he needs to move on sometimes. Check a box. Here's a lie. Save it for closing.
That's
interesting. That is what you're supposed to do.
That's interesting. It's actually, your analysis is a bit different than what we've heard from other experts, and I want to get to that. You talk about the assumptions. Here's another one that Lewin threw at Durst.
Mr. Durst, you have clearly denied that the incident happened. What I'm asking you is, I want you to assume for a moment that it did happen. If it did happen, would you agree that that would have been an act of domination and control over your wife?
It didn't happen. If Kathy had been naked, she would have told Tom he could stay or leave. This was Tom's individual problem, not Kathy's and not mine.
Your Honor, can the court please instruct the witness? I've asked 5 times now.
Answer the question, or if you cannot answer the question, then the record will reflect you cannot answer the question.
You want me to assume Kathy was naked?
No. I want you to assume the following. I want you to assume that Kathy is wearing the flimsy nightgown your brother described. I want you to further assume that when he showed up, you deliberately and intentionally were lifting up her nightgown, exposing her, and that she found in her responses the activity to be uncomfortable, not something she wanted, and that your brother's impression was that it was a power trip. My question is, assuming that happened, if that behavior occurred, would you agree that that would have been an example of domination and control over your wife?
The fact that Kathy and I were publicly hugging and maybe petting a little bit and upset Tom, I do not think shows anything like I was trying to control her. It was the two of us.
I'm going to try once more. I want you to assume that you go in.
I can't assume what you want me to assume.
That's a prime example of some of the things Jeffrey was talking about that he thinks are wrong in this case. So, Angela, I turn it over to you. Do you take issue with the way Lewin is questioning Durst? Some of the times it's very long-winded questions. They're compounded questions. You can argue that maybe Durst doesn't even understand the question because they're a bit convoluted. At the same time, my opinion is I think he's been doing a tremendous job at trying to paint Durst as a liar who can't be believed and is going to say anything he needs to say to get out of this. So I'm curious what you think, Angela.
So I think the prosecution is doing just as I do agree with you, Jesse. However, I do see sometimes he doesn't stop, and he does ask the one question too many, and he's trying too hard for the Perry Mason moment sometimes. But I also think with regard to the assumption questions, I think the defense could object, but perhaps it's their strategy not to object, because there is a point in this Q&A where you as the viewer or as the jury, you're watching this Q&A, and it's frustrating to watch. You can see Lewin is getting frustrated, and that's exacerbated by the fact that the defendant is older and he's sick. He pauses, so the prosecutor oftentimes loses his flow. And you kind of, after a while, you kind of miss the point of what he's trying to do because it's moving so slowly. He's getting frustrated. He's getting the judge involved. So instead of having a nice flowing cross, you have kind of a disjointed Q&A. And maybe the strategy is to just let that frustration continue so that the prosecutor's points gets lost in all that frustration and Q&A and time spent trying to get the defendant to talk.
And as we talked about earlier, Lewin even questioned Durst about these pauses, saying, are they legitimate? Are you really looking at your screen, or are you pausing to come up with the answer there? So you see the tension and the drama between the two. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into more of Durst on the stand. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So we're talking about Robert Durst. We're going to be back live in that courtroom in about 45 minutes. That's when we plan to see Durst back on the stand being grilled by prosecutor John Lewin in this trial of whether or not Durst murdered his friend Susan Berman back in December 2000. We're breaking down all of the testimony right now that you might have missed. And we go back to the big theme here about Durst lying. That's been what Lewin has been pressing him about. And one of the unique aspects is that Lewin had actually interviewed Durst on tape. We all saw it in 2015 out in New Orleans. That question became, was Durst lying in 2015? Is he telling the truth now? Are there inconsistencies? Let's see how this played out.
By the time Kathy disappeared, you didn't feel the same way about her that you did before, right? I mean,
oh no. I mean, Gilberta has it right in her quote when she first met us. We were in love. Right. Period. No two ways about it. We were in love. That lasted about 2 years.
Right.
And then we had the thing with the abortion.
Right.
And that was the end of it.
I don't feel that way at all. I'm surprised I said that.
Well, you can't blame Mr. Jarecki for this one, correct?
Correct.
So you're agreeing you said it, correct?
I agree I said it.
Did I give you a script in advance or tell you, here's what I would like you to say during our interview for your plea bargain?
No.
So you would agree that everything you just said there came completely from your own mind, from your own mouth, from your own memory, correct?
Correct.
And you would also agree, Mr. Durst, that you have to admit to that. You don't have a choice because it's in front of you, it's being played to you, it's not from Jarecki, you're trapped. Like a little rat in a cage.
Comment, it's an argument.
I'll withdraw the last part.
Sustained.
But you're admitting it, Mr. Durst, because you don't have a choice but to admit it, correct?
I don't know what I'm admitting. I have no idea what your question is.
My question is that this is a statement that impeaches what you just said and what Mr. DeGuerin asked you about, that in essence, the abortion was not a contentious part of your relationship and that you both moved on. This statement you have just agreed is accurate and is what you said, and it states that once she had the abortion, quote, that was the end of it, correct?
I am, su-
Objection.
I overruled your objection.
They made it yet.
I am surprised I
Repeating your
said that.
objection.
I do not remember feeling that at all.
I hadn't stated my objection yet.
What's
The
your
abortion was before we
My
bought
objection
the
was
house.
the first part of it was a comment and an argument.
Overruled.
Go ahead, Mr. Durst. You can answer. You started to answer and we couldn't hear you.
The abortion was before we even bought the house in South Salem. When we were living in South Salem, we were in love. I do not think abortion was the end of our loving relationship.
But you agree that's exactly what you said, correct?
That's what I said.
So can you explain, Mr. Durst, why is it that you said this to a deputy district attorney and 2 police detectives if it wasn't true?
Why would I talk to the district attorney and tell him something that wasn't true? I don't know. I just felt it was something that would move along.
Are you doing that as we're talking today right now?
No.
So, Jeffrey, I know you took issue with how Lewin is phrasing these questions and that there should be objections, but isn't that a key point right there, catching him in these lies? And you see almost him again, is he trying to come up with the answers on the spot? Is he being honest with this jury right now? Because it seems that Lewin keeps putting him in these traps.
Well, he thinks he's putting him in these traps, right? He's even calling him a rat in a cage, which is completely inappropriate, and I'm glad he withdrew it. But what you're still saying, and I stand by it, he did catch him in a lie. But when you catch a witness in a lie, you notate it, you bring it up in closing. You don't then ask the witness to explain why he was lying. You don't give him that opportunity to come up with a plausible explanation. You don't ask him if he's lying now. He's never going to say yes to that. So it just doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And quite frankly, it gives Bob Durst a way to respond. So he is opening the door himself to Bob Durst figuring out a response to this. And he's doing it so much that Bob Durst just may do it. I don't know that he's done it yet, but he just may come up with a way to put this pie directly on Lewin's face that he thinks he's slamming on Durst's face.
Well, what is unique about this is that Durst is in a position to having to explain why he said the things both on direct examination, in his 2015 interview, with what he said in the HBO series The Jinx, and he has to keep track of all these things. And Lewin, who is just knows every inch of this case and has such a thorough outline of this, he's prepared. So there's another point where he's trying to talk about the relationship between Durst and Kathy, his missing wife, about what that relationship was like, the abuse there, the violence. That's what he's been trying to point out. Here's another aspect that was interesting to note.
He said, well, you know, I'll make it real quick. Well, it wasn't real quick. She finally got back into the car. I said, you're supposed to make it real quick. We just wasted half an hour sitting here. And anyway, she didn't agree with me, and I thought it was soda in her face.
Was it a lot of soda?
It was a big cup of soda, big, whatever you want to call it, glass of soda, plastic, of course.
And what was, do you think it had to do with sitting in the car and that feeling of...
Yeah, it was an hour and a half from home. You want to, get one of these lousy hamburgers and soggy French fries here. You just wait a little while, we'll be home. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time waiting here. And she was, excuse me, running in. And she went in and came out half an hour later. And I said, this is supposed to be quick. And she said, well, they're just closing it, and I had to get them to turn the grill back on. Something like that, ridiculous.
And when you did it, when you threw the liquid on her or whatever, did you throw the cup at her, or did you throw the liquid?
No, I threw the liquid.
And so she was wet?
She was wet. It was cold.
Right. And you drove home like that?
She drove home like that.
And after it happened, did you have, when you had these incidents periodically, did you have, did you feel bad a minute later, or did you feel like justified? Did you feel
Absolutely justified. We just waste all this time to get this yucky stuff.
Does that refresh your memory, Mr. Durst?
I said all that. I don't remember the incident.
When you watch that, when you listen to yourself, what's your response when you listen to yourself saying that? How does that make you feel?
I don't remember the incident.
So you're telling me even right now, you have no memory of that incident?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Durst, would you agree that you went into intricate detail during that interview about that incident?
Well, I just heard it, saw it. I went into detail.
Well, what you talked about was you remembered where you were going. You remembered the restaurant she stopped at. You remember that they had to turn on the grill. You remembered that you were upset that you had to wait in the car for a half an hour. You remembered that you threw the stuff in her face. You remembered that it was water and not soda, or soda and not water. You remembered that Kathy drove home. That's a lot of detail for you to remember. Would you agree?
That's what I remembered in 2010. Now it's 2021, and I don't remember the incident or when it occurred.
So you can remember what the minimum wage in Vermont was in 1971, but you can't remember throwing water in your wife's face while she's in a car because she's not fast enough getting back in there?
The answer to your question is yes, I remember the minimum wage in Vermont in 1971. I don't remember something with Kathy on the freeway that involved me throwing water at her.
You're smiling. You think this is funny? I'm just wondering, do you think this is funny?
Sitting here, it's funny that whatever this incident was, it was so trivial I forgot it.
Okay, now, Angela, it's important for Lewin to stress this point because he's trying to establish this kind of abusive relationship. At the same time, does it seem believable to you that Durst would know all those details 2010, but now doesn't recall it at all? Again, we're already left with the impression he admitted to lying in the past. So what do you make of that point?
So I think it was a very good point. I think that it painted him as a callous person. Like you throw liquid water on your wife because she took too long. I think that was a good point to make to the juror. If I'm a juror watching that, it shows me the kind of person I'm dealing with. But just back to Jeffrey's point, I think the point was made, and then he kept asking the question. Well, you're watching out. How does that make you feel? And he's like, oh, I don't remember the incident. Okay, he doesn't remember the incident. And then I think the point was made. And then he just kept asking the questions, and I don't know how much more that added to it. I think it just gives him the opportunity to say something different. But it just by him saying I don't recall does make him sound somewhat incredible. Although he is old and frail, so it's possible that he doesn't actually remember that incident anymore. That is possible. But either way, I think the point was made, and Lewin should move on.
There are times, though, that he does remember certain details and not others. For example, I remember he remembered November 4th, 2016 as his first court appearance in this case, and Lewin said, you beat me there. I just knew it was 2016, or I just knew it was November, but he remembered the specific date. So there was another point when Durst was asked, maybe you don't remember this because you were so abusive to Kathy, you might not remember a particular incident. Take a look.
Would you agree that throwing a huge glass of water at your wife is an extremely demeaning and humiliating action?
Somehow it seems demeaning and humiliating have got to be in front of other people, and Kathy and I were the only ones there.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miller's correcting me. It's soda, which is, I think, even worse.
Whether it was soda or water, I just don't remember the incident.
Mr. Durst, would you agree that the fact that you can't remember this incident is indicative of the fact that you were so violent with her, you were so abusive to her, that no one instance stands out because there's just too many of them?
Oh, this one does not stand out at all.
Does that seem, if you're listening to this, just want to ask you, let's assume you were listening to somebody tell that story about what they had done to their wife. Would you think that's something that any human being would remember?
Well, I don't remember it, so I don't remember it.
It's not what I asked you. Listen to my question. Would you agree that if you were listening to somebody tell a story like that, in that kind of detail, and then they responded 8, 10 years later, you know what? I have no memory of that whatsoever. Would you think, if you were hearing that, that that was credible?
I have no memory of it. I think it's credible, but I have no memory of it. We're talking about something that I don't think was anywhere near what I made of it talking to Andrew.
Well, would you agree that what you made of it talking to Andrew sounded pretty horrific?
Sounded like it still didn't seem like such a big deal. We're talking about stopping on the thruway.
Okay, Jeffrey, again, the point that's trying to be made here is that he was so abusive he might not remember this. How overall has Lewin been doing at trying to establish that Durst abused Kathy, which is an important fact if we're trying to consider if he actually murdered her? So you tell me.
Well, I think he's doing a good job of showing that Durst was abusive to Kathy because he's got several witnesses that have come in and detailed incidents that have occurred. He has several incidents that Durst has admitted to over the years in different interviews. But again, what he's doing, and I hate to keep belaboring this, but what he's doing a terrible, terrible job of is to make Robert Durst a co-conspirator in his own prosecution. He's trying to get him to say that this is so abusive and for him to say that he remembers it exactly like that and that he was so abusive that he can't remember one incident. There isn't a defendant on the planet that is going to say that. And I can tell you right now that I have had a handful of prosecutors ask my clients whether they thought what was happening in the courtroom was funny based on their reaction. And I've never had a juror come back guilty after a prosecutor did that because it is not something that the jury finds likable or credible from the prosecutor. The prosecutor knows that this is not funny. The jury knows that the prosecutor knows that. It is a bully tactic to do that when somebody has a human reaction, regardless of how callous that reaction may seem. And again, he just cannot help himself. He hates Robert Durst, and I think the jury is going to hate him for that, whether they convict or not.
Well, let me just follow up with you on that, Jeffrey, because maybe one of the things that he's doing is it's unbelievable that Robert Durst would admit that he lied to the jury in Galveston, Texas. It's unbelievable that Robert Durst would say, if I murdered Susan or Kathy or Morris, I wouldn't tell you. I would lie about it. So if he can get these nuggets from Durst, why not press him on it? Why not keep going and beating this horse towards assumptions and hypotheticals to get him to say things? Because maybe he would say it.
Well, because you're beating a dead horse and his batting average is incredibly low on this. And it's just not something that he needs to do. Again, it is unnecessary. And if you're not going to get the correct answer enough times out of Durst, you start to lose credibility with the jury yourself. That is why when you do impeachment, you don't ask the so question. You get the lie out there, and then in closing argument, you summarize all of these lies and all the reasons that the jury shouldn't believe Bob Durst's testimony and shouldn't believe his course of events. But you are not going to get Bob Durst to do it for you. And even if you get him to do it 1 or 2 times, but you try it 150 times, the jury's going to forget the 2 because they're going to remember the 148. That's just the way it is. And he is beating a dead horse is exactly what he's doing. It is time to hit these marks of impeachment and bring them up in closing. And he refuses to do it because he wants to be the one to make Robert Durst look a fool instead of the other way around. It is very personal, and it is coming across in his cross. It is unprofessional.
All right, well, we'll see where it goes today as we wait to jump live there in the next half hour. We're going to take a break. We'll talk more about Robert Durst, but when we come back, we're going to quickly talk about Johnny Depp and, of course, R. Kelly. We'll be back. All right. Well, again, this is Robert Durst on the stand. We're going to see that again, maybe in the next 15 minutes, being questioned about his inconsistencies, his lies, and Lewin keeps pressing him on it. And Lewin keeps pressing him about, why do you seem to remember certain things but not others? Watch.
So, Mr. Durst, can you explain why it was that you testified to what you've now said was a vivid memory?
I misspoke.
Did you also misspoke about the vivid memory, which was originally your father, on 2 different occasions to Mr. Jarecki? And then when you got on the stand, you discussed a vivid memory of your grandfather. Can you explain that contradiction?
I think I did see my mother on the roof, when I was with both my grandfather and with my father. But I saw my mother close up with my grandfather when I was on the inside hall on the 2nd floor of our house, and I saw her out the window.
Mr. Durst, I read for you your prior statements. Your prior statements were talking about both very clear descriptions. In one, how your grandfather woke you out of bed, and the second one, how your father woke you out of bed. And then you explained how they walked you down the hallway, and the basic other information was the same, but one was your father, one was your grandfather. And my question to you is, for such a significant childhood memory, and one you've discussed frequently, can you explain why it is that when you're talking to one person, you say one thing, when you're talking to another person, you say another?
When I said my grandfather came and got me, I was stating what was correct. When I said my father came and got me, I was misspeaking.
And you agree, because I read it to you twice, you didn't just misspeak once about your father getting you. You, in the second quote that I mentioned from Mr. Jarecki, you discussed it again. So you misspoke twice. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Jeffrey, I think it's clear there are inconsistencies. There are admissions of lying. And the question becomes, when he's going to be on redirect from his defense attorneys, how do they fix this? How do they rehabilitate it? You had mentioned the questionable questioning by John Lewin, but what is his defense attorneys? What can they do under redirect?
Right. What they need to do is they need to have a plausible reason why his memory can fail him from time to time. And it's really built in for them, quite frankly. He's sitting there with a shunt in his head. He's frail, he's old. The problem that I think that the prosecution runs into with these inconsistencies, especially when they are from video, from a prior thing from the Jinx or a prior interview, is that the person that is being interviewed by the Jinx and by Lewin previously is a completely different person than the person that's sitting in front of the jury right now. And I don't think anybody is saying that his frailty is of his own doing. He has medical conditions. They disagree about the severity of those conditions, but everybody knows that he has gotten old, he has gotten frail because of his medical situation. And to say that the jury might not be able to buy that medical condition is something that has occurred over the course of his life, and that they might not buy if the defense is selling that, I think is a little bit foolish, because everybody has seen loved ones in their lives get old, make mistakes, have their memory start to fail them, change as a person, all of those things. And so I think that there is a bit of an issue for the prosecution in harping on these video statements where Robert Durst is a significantly different person than the person that's sitting in front of the jury. And I think that that is, if I were the defense in this case, that's where I would go. I would stick with the medical condition and the age.
But is he that different when back in 2015 and now he said, even if I murdered these people, I wouldn't tell you. Said the same thing in 2015, same thing here in 2021. Now, speaking of that, here is Lewin talking to him about his honesty in that 2015 interview.
Mr. Durst, I want to talk about the New Orleans interview in 2015. Were you completely honest with Detectives Romero, Whalen, and myself during that interview?
No, absolutely not.
You would agree that there were times during that interview where basically you looked us right in the eye and you just bold-faced lied. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And there were also times where instead of lying, you simply said that you were not going to answer a question and were going to, quote, stay away from an area of inquiry, correct?
I don't remember doing that, but I would not be surprised if I did.
Do you remember specifically when asked some questions about where you were at the time of Susan's death, your response was, quote, I'm going to stay away from that. Does that refresh your memory at all?
No, but I don't deny I said that.
Now, during your interview in New Orleans, you were not under oath. Is that correct?
You gave me the Miranda rule. No, correct. I was not under oath.
And I just want to ask, did that make a difference? You've just said that you lied. So I just wanted to ask you, did it make a difference to you that you were not under oath when you were lying?
No.
Do you consider, by the way, you understand you're under oath today, is that right?
I understand that, yes.
And do you consider the oath that you've taken today to tell the truth, do you believe that to be a sacred oath?
Do I believe it to be a what oath?
A sacred oath.
Sacred?
Sacred.
Sacred? Are you saying sacred?
Sacred. S-A-C-R-E-D. Sacred oath.
I don't know the difference between a sacred oath and a regular oath.
See, here's the problem, Jeffrey. When you identify a man who has no issue lying and you're telling this jury, I didn't murder Susan Berman, and you come up with another story that she might have been speaking to someone else on the phone and that you thought someone else might have been in the house, it becomes a question, why do we believe you now? So even if he wasn't honest back in 2003 when he spoke to the Galveston, when he testified in front of the Galveston jury, he wasn't honest with Detective Struck, he wasn't honest in the 2015 interview, and that's putting aside what he's doing today. Those seem to be the biggest problems for Robert Durst in my mind.
Well, I tend to agree with you that the track record of dishonesty is probably, if something is going to trip him up other than public sentiment about him, it's likely to be that. But it also is really the opposite of self-serving for Lewin to point out that he wasn't under oath during those conversations and he's under oath now. Because what Durst is saying is, believe me today, because I'm not trying to navigate my way through an interview with law enforcement without legal counsel. And so believe me today, I now am here to tell the truth under oath. And so Lewin is basically shooting himself in the foot by pointing out all the lies that he told previously when he wasn't under oath, because there is a difference to that. And the sacred oath and an oath and all of that kind of stuff. The bottom line is, when you're under oath, doesn't matter what you personally believe about it. You can be charged with perjury. And so there is an actual penalty to lying under oath that there is not when you're being interviewed by detectives and district attorneys. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court has said that those same detectives and district attorneys can lie to you because you're going to lie to them occasionally. That is in Supreme Court case law, and the reason that somebody can't get out of a statement that they make to law enforcement when law enforcement lies to them about having the murder weapon or having their fingerprint on the gun or whatever it may be. And so if you want to get into whether he was lying in the interview with law enforcement, let's get into it, because law enforcement can lie to him too. And then all of a sudden, everybody has dirty hands in an interview but now we're on the stand. Let's believe what's on the stand. That's what Robert Durst's team should do with this. They should throw it right back into Lewin's face.
Well, the back and forth between Lewin and Durst will continue, and clearly we have different perspectives on this, and we're going to watch it all together. Jeffrey Wolf, thank you so much for taking the time. Again, I wish I had you on for a little bit longer as well, but we're going to be live in that courtroom. We're all going to watch it together. I am signing off. You are in great hands. Bob Bianchi is up next. Stay with us here on Law and Crime. We'll be right back right after this.